Okay, welcome everyone to the first of three classes where we're going to be looking at the healing power of forgiveness. I'm going to try to share the screen. Hopefully, we'll have good technology karma the rest of tonight. Hopefully, you can see the prayers on the screen. Jana, were you willing to lead us in that tonight?
Praise to Shakyamuni Buddha 3 times in English. To the
The founder, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the
the
one
one
gone
gone
beyond,
beyond,
the
the
foe
foe
destroyer,
destroyer,
the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the
knower of the
world,
world,
supreme
supreme
guide of
guide
human
of
beings,
human beings to
and
be tamed,
teacher of gods and
gods and
human.
human beings.
To
To
you, the
you, the
completely and
completely and
fully
fully
awakened,
awakened one,
the
the
endowed,
endowed,
transcendent
transcendent
destroyer,
destroyer,
the
the
glorious
glorious
conqueror,
conqueror,
the
the subduer
subduer
from
from
the
the
Shakya
Shakya
clan.
clan. I
I
prostrate,
prostrate,
make
make
offerings, and
offerings,
go
and
for
go for
refuge. Let's just
refuge.
do one tonight since we're a little behind.
Short mandala offering, once in Tibetan. Sajipo ki
Joche,
Me, wrong,
Pe,
Inji, Idagyang, Adi,
Ni De Gyan Padi, Sangye Jin Tu Mitte Uwayi Roko Nam Dakshin Chojo Idam Guru Ratna Mandalakam Niryatayami.
Refuge in bodhicitta, once in English, twice in Tibetan. I go
For refuge until I am enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and
Dharma,
the
the
Supreme
Supreme Assembly.
Assembly. By the
The
merits I
merits I
create
create
through
through
listening
listening
to the
to the
Dharma,
Dharma,
may I
may I
become a
become a
Buddha
Buddha
in
in
order to
order to
benefit
benefit all
sentient
sentient
beings.
beings.
Sangye
Day,
Chodam
Rodang,
Sakhe
Soki,
Chonam
Chonam, La, Yang, Chu,
Chubardu
Bardu,
Dagni Kapsu
Dagni, Kyabsu,
Dagi
Chi,
Chanyan Ki Pesonam Ki Dola
Dola,
Pinchir
Pinchir,
Sangye
Sangye,
Drupal
Drupar,
Sho
Shog,
Sangye
Day,
Chodam
Rodang,
Soki
Soki, Chonam, La,
Pranam
Yang,
Janchu
Chu,
Chubardu
Bardu,
Dagni
Dagni,
Kapsu
Kyabsu, Chi,
Dagi Chanyan
Chonyan,
Ki
Gepe,
Pesonam
Sonam,
Ki
Gi,
Dola
Dola,
Pinchir
Pinchir,
Sangye
Sangye, Drupar,
Drupal Sho.
Shog.
Thank you, Jana, for leading us in the prayers. So let's just do a short meditation in order to focus the mind a bit and then to set our motivation together for tonight's class. So just spend the first few minutes focusing on the breath. I think everyone probably has a technique they already use with the breath. So just feel free to use that. Trying to keep your awareness with the breath, and whenever the mind wanders, just guide the mind gently back to the breath. So we'll do this in silence for just a few minutes, and then I will lead you in a short reflection to set our motivation together. So in this course, we're going to be looking at forgiveness in a Buddhist context. And we all know already from our own experience with forgiveness how much it helps to remove blocks that we might have between ourselves and others, to be able to restore some level of harmony, connection with others. And of course, this is what the Bodhisattva path is all about, trying to make sure that we can be of the greatest benefit to others by kind of keeping those communication lines open, keeping us with our hearts open towards all beings. So let's set our motivation of bodhicitta that is based on that idea, feeling the connection that we have to all beings throughout the countless lifetimes that we've had, even in this single life that we have right now, the connection that we feel to others. And on the basis of that, the concern that we have for others and their situation, their desire to be happy, their desire to avoid suffering. And we channel our love and compassion for beings into this wish to be able to help them to achieve what they seek, to find the happiness that they desire, and to be free from all suffering. And then the recognition that to do that fully and perfectly, we have to develop ourselves. So we're going to engage in these teachings on forgiveness within that context of this is how we do improve our own minds and develop our own hearts so we can be of greater benefit to others, eventually by becoming a Buddha, so we can then lead each and every one of them into that same state. And then you can open your eyes fully and we'll start tonight's class. So this class, I sometimes like to talk about where the roots of these classes came from because this one in particular was quite interesting. There was a gentleman named Reverend Phil. Unfortunately, he's passed away. He was a sort of local TV radio personality in Santa Fe. And somehow he found out when I was starting to teach on the circuit, he made some connection to me and he invited me to be on his radio show first. And then he got one of these cable TV shows that was just, a local cable thing. And he had a panel one time that consisted of this sounds like a setup for a joke. It was, a Buddhist teacher, myself, a unity minister, a retired Presbyterian minister, and a Jewish rabbi all walk into a bar. All four of us were on this panel, and he was getting us to give like our different faith perspectives on forgiveness. And it was kind of interesting because no one had ever really talked to me about forgiveness in Buddhism before, and I hadn't really articulated what forgiveness was really about in Buddhism. Because it's not a topic that we discuss that much. In fact, I'll even maybe share a little bit of an article by Ken MacLeod. Some of you know of him, a pretty amazing Tibetan Buddhist teacher himself, who his article is called "Forgiveness is Not Buddhist." And there's an interesting perspective there. But anyway, so I had to, kind of come up from my own like research and poking around to see, well, what does inform our forgiveness? So I put together this presentation on the basis of that initial kind of investigation into what is forgiveness and why do we practice forgiveness in Buddhism? What's the context for it? I might mention as an aside, one of the most interesting of the presenters, in my estimation, was the Jewish rabbi, because you had like a whole dimension to forgiveness that I had never even kind of contemplated. Of course, in any of the theistic traditions, you're dealing with forgiveness from a creator God, because you've offended God as well as offended your fellow beings by, doing anything that is harmful to them. So there's another dimension to it that, again, we don't have in Buddhism. But it was kind of an interesting little dialogue. You can find the video on YouTube if you wish. If you put in Reverend Phil, or I think the name of his show actually was The Words of the Prophet. And it was from that song by Simon and Garfunkel. The words of the prophets are written on the subway walls anyway. So the words of the prophet, and you just put in forgiveness after that. And you can watch it if you wish. It's only about a half hour long, I believe, maybe 45 minutes. I can't remember how long it was. But yeah, so forgiveness again is something that, like I said, we don't really tend to talk about so much. Ken MacLeod in his article, he says it's not really Buddhist from the vantage point of it being a foreign concept to Buddhism. I don't think it's completely foreign. His Holiness the Dalai Lama, of course, talks about forgiveness a lot, and I'm going to share some passages from him over the course of these 3 nights. But also, it's one of our bodhisattva vows. If you look at the root bodhisattva vows, the third one is not accepting an apology, to not forgive another for what they have come to you, and with some contrition, some desire to be redeemed from the acts that they did, to not extend forgiveness to them. So it actually is part of our bodhisattva practices in terms of the vows that many of you hold. So just know that, again, this is not something that is completely foreign to Buddhism, but nonetheless, not something that's talked about maybe as often as we should. I'll bring in some more secular elements around forgiveness as well, so that you kind of understand that. Again, this is the first session. We do have 2 more sessions before the Christmas and New Year's holidays, which I just might remind people that we won't be meeting on those 2 Thursdays up here in Taos, but we will the next 2 Thursdays. So the purpose of this course is to explore and understand the nature of forgiveness within the context of the Buddha's teachings, and to learn how to practice skillfully 3 elements of forgiveness. Then this is based on a meditation by Jack Kornfield. Many of you know of Jack Kornfield, very involved in the insight tradition, amazing teacher. I've never had the opportunity to receive teachings from him in person, but I've listened to a number of his teachings. He divides his forgiveness meditation into 3 components, and I'll probably touch on the first one, hopefully a good share of it, if not all of it tonight, forgiving ourselves. This is where the forgiveness process starts. Then seeking forgiveness, asking forgiveness of others, and apologizing. And then finally getting to the place where we practice forgiving those who have harmed us. We might think that when we come right in the door, we want to just jump right to forgiving other people, but it is good to go through a process of working with these, sequences of forgiveness in these stages. So this is what we'll be working with, and I want you to all kind of become familiar with that through the time together. It's all showing up correctly on the screen right here. Okay, good. So I want to talk, this is the outline for what I want to cover. I'm going to begin tonight by talking about the nature of forgiveness. What do we mean by forgiveness? I'm going to use some secular definitions, as well as some things that Buddhists have put forward as a definition, a description of forgiveness. I want to talk about the rationale in Buddhism for practicing forgiveness. What are the core teachings that really inform our practice of forgiveness? And then we'll jump into the practice, again, that 3 levels of the practice. And then at the conclusion, we'll talk about, just in brief, how do we make forgiveness a life practice? How do we make sure we incorporate that into the ways that we offend others, or that we are offended by others? So what is forgiveness? Again, in Buddhism, you're not going to find a definition. There's not the perfection of forgiveness as there is like the perfection of generosity and patience and all these things. So we don't really have a standard definition for forgiveness. Nonetheless, we'll start with an encyclopedia definition of forgiveness, which I actually like pretty well. I like the dimensions to it. It says forgiveness is the mental, emotional, and spiritual process. You could even include physical in there. I might mention that. The body retains a lot of things, as all of you know. The trauma that we've experienced and so on can be embedded within the body. It can be a physical process of letting go of all these things, letting go of resentment, indignation, or anger against another person for a perceived offense, difference, or mistake. It can also mean ceasing to demand punishment or restitution for transgressions, real or imagined. That last part, maybe again, we don't really talk about quite so much of restitution and what have you, or punishment. Certainly, there are levels of acts where that is part of the equation. We're going to tend to focus in this course mainly on our day-to-day stuff, where things happen and we offend others or they offend us, and how do we work with forgiveness in that context. But nonetheless, again, there are those dimensions to it, especially when we have more major offenses that we have experienced or that we have done to others. But I like this, again, the dimensions of it: mental, emotional, spiritual, and as I said, even physical. How do we let go of things? This is an interesting dimension to forgiveness. We're mainly talking about things we're doing, in a sense, for ourselves. It's a bit of enlightened self-interest. We're not saying that forgiveness doesn't have an effect on others, but it's a way that we can assure that we don't continue to harm others, or even begin to harm others, on the basis of the offenses that they have done towards us. in particular. So there is that side to it. The next one, this is from, many of you are familiar with the Ready, Set, Happy and the 16 guidelines. This is a part of the FPMT, our parent organization called Foundation for Developing Compassion and Wisdom. One of the 16 guidelines is forgiveness. These are 16 practices that we're encouraged to engage in and meditate on. Ready, Set, Happy is the children's version of that. And so this is a definition that's from that program in particular. Forgiveness means reclaiming peace of mind by letting go of anger towards someone who has done something that feels hurtful or disturbing. Learning to forgive doesn't mean forgetting what happened. It means making a new start. Again, it's worded a little bit for kids, but it gets across the point, right? What we're mainly talking about is our letting go of all of this heavy stuff that we're holding on to so we can have our peace of mind back. So we can be back to a place where we are in harmony with others, where we're not holding on to something that is going to be, again, an obstacle to our being with others, whether it's something we've, done to another or they've done to us. And again, we're going to talk a little bit later in the last part of these processes when we are working with forgiving others, that it doesn't mean forgetting what happened. That we're not just talking about glossing over everything and going, oh yeah, everyone's fine, everything's fine. I forgive you, you forgive me. It's all one big happy family again. We do have to kind of retain some awareness of the things that have occurred and be attentive to that, because we don't want to commit the offenses we have committed towards others again. And certainly we don't want others to do that to ourselves or to other beings that they interact with. So forgetting is not a part of it. They often use that phrase, right? Forgive and forget. But I don't think forgetting is really useful sometimes. I mean, there may be some occasions where it's okay to kind of forget it because it's nothing that major. But we'll talk about that more later. So these two first definitions that I'm sharing with you, I kind of like. More poetic ways, perhaps, of describing what we mean by forgiveness. We'll start with Jack Kornfield's one-liner on this. Forgiveness means giving up all hope of a better past. I like the kind of humor behind that, because we all have had a past that we've had to go through, right? Various things that have happened to us in our lives, interactions with others where, again, we've been the offender, where they've been the offender. We can't restore the past to some idyllic point. It's impossible. But we tend to think that we want to, be able to go back and make a better past. Well, the past has happened. Things have occurred. We can't necessarily change that, but we can work with forgiveness as a tool to develop things for the future. And that's the second definition that is on that screen. Let me see if I can get this all to work correctly again. Should be on the screen here. Yeah, okay, good. This is from a writer named Paul Bowes. Bowes, I think is his name. Forgiveness does not change the past then, but it enlarges the future. And that was something, again, that was brought up in that FPMT 16 guidelines definition, that it's kind of investing in the future, saying, okay, this stuff has happened in the past. I've been the offender or I've been offended. I'm going to work on developing a better future, invest in healing my relationships with others so that things can be better. I want to share a little bit from Greater Good Science Center. Many of you have heard of them. Perhaps you're on their mailing list. They work out of Berkeley, UC Berkeley. Amazing group of people. They've got a website and a daily newsletter. I think it's pretty much daily. They talk in their article about forgiveness, saying psychologists generally define forgiveness as a conscious, deliberate decision to release feelings of resentment or vengeance toward a person or group who has harmed you, regardless of whether they actually deserve your forgiveness. It's an interesting little add-on at the end, right? We're going to look at that as part of when we work with others about whether this idea of they deserve our forgiveness. Of course, also what's interesting about this is that this is a psychology point of view where they're mainly working about us forgiving others and letting go of our resentment towards others. But as we're going to be exploring in this course, we also have to forgive ourselves, and we also have to be willing to go forward to seek forgiveness of others that we have offended. So there's a lot of dimensions to forgiveness that I think are kind of missing from this. And this idea of whether they actually deserve our forgiveness or not, it's an interesting perspective. This other description of forgiveness, it comes from a book I picked up when I was doing this course for the first time. it's called Forgiveness is a Choice. And I really thought, oh, this is going to be good. And when I started reading this, I really liked it. And then when I got to the end, I was like, what? Anyway, I'll read it. When unjustly hurt by another, we forgive when we overcome the resentment toward the offender. Very common theme that we're seeing in all these descriptions, right? Not by denying our right to the resentment, but instead by trying to offer the wrongdoer compassion, benevolence, and love. Well, I like that. That's going to be something we're going to talk about shortly. But then the final bit, as we give these, we as forgivers realize that the offender does not necessarily have a right to such gifts. It's kind of an interesting perspective. This is something, again, we'll be examining, and I don't know that everyone is going to agree with me on this, and I put it out there as kind of my stance, but there is nothing from the side of the person that should be stopping us from forgiving them. That's my feeling. Again, not everyone is going to come to you seeking forgiveness, just like we have probably not come to everyone that we've offended and asked for their forgiveness. That's a big step. And I think that, again, when we go to that bodhisattva vow that I mentioned earlier, that root downfall, that is the case where someone comes to you and they apologize, and how wonderful that they've done that. They put themselves out there and said, I did something that offended you, please forgive me. And then the door is open for us to give that forgiveness, obviously, because we've got that set up. But there's nothing stopping us from being more forgiving to others who have offended us. And certainly, even, with regard to ourselves, we should be throwing the forgiveness at ourselves frequently, because we are going to step in it frequently. We are going to make mistakes. We're all beings who don't have perfect minds. So again, I think that whether the person deserves it or not, or has a right to it or not, these are kind of strange language to me in a Buddhist
Hopefully,
context. Again, our society has a lot of things around forgiveness that are trappings of it that get caught up in our justice system and
hopefully.
needing justice, needing fairness, needing things. And this was one thing, again, going back to that wonderful little panel I had with those folks discussing forgiveness. In the Jewish perspective, there was like this whole thing where first you do this step, and then you do that step, and then you do this step, and then it was like, and then sign on the dotted line, and you're forgiven. And I'm joking in a little bit, but there was very much more a process for how you go about getting to a point where the forgiveness is somewhat complete. Now, in a Buddhist perspective, we don't have all those kinds of things of making sure this box is ticked off and that box is, settled and whatever, and then we can extend forgiveness. I think forgiveness is something, as I was saying earlier, we tend to do mainly for ourselves, because we're the ones that are carrying around the resentment. We're the ones that are carrying around, even when we talk about forgiving ourselves, we're carrying around a mind that's tormented with the guilty feelings that we have and the tendency we have to put ourselves down. That's why we need forgiveness mainly. It does have an impact on others frequently. I'm not saying that shouldn't be a part of our practice, but certainly the peripheral impact is that if we are in a space where we're more forgiving, we will naturally be more connected to others, as I said in the motivation tonight. We'll be in harmony with others. We won't be holding on to things that create barriers and boundaries to our heart opening to other beings. So again, and we'll go through more steps in this. There are
If
a number more
anyone,
elements that I haven't really touched on yet that I'm sure I'll get a chance to go into over the course of these 3 evenings. Let's go into kind of uh, a Buddhist background, the rationale in Buddhism for practicing forgiveness. And I will try to do my best to create some time at the end for any questions or comments. But if you're on Zoom, please feel free to put those in the chat box if things do come up, or write them down, and we'll have an opportunity later. As I see it, the rationale in Buddhism for practicing forgiveness comes down to 3 elements. And there are probably more. This was what I came up with when I did my initial kind of investigating it. The first one is the role of karma and the element of interdependence that is kind of entailed in karma. We don't create karma in isolation. Karma is something that is an engagement in the world around us and with others. And so I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in a moment. The second one are the faults of anger and hatred. Of course, this is kind of implied in here, is that if we aren't forgiving, of course, you can be absent-minded and not forgive simply because you don't really care. But the tendency is that we hold on to our anger and our resentment. We saw that in a lot of these definitions of forgiveness, right? That it means letting go of your resentment, your anger, your animosity towards someone who has harmed you. we need to look at the faults of anger and hatred and be clear on that and understand that that is not a healthy place to be for ourselves or to help or to have another person stay in that place because we've offended them. That's why we want to, extend an apology to others and so on, because it does have an effect on them. The third element that I want to touch on is the need for compassion. Compassion is such a root teaching in almost all spiritual traditions, if not all, but in Buddhism plays a particular role because that is what feeds into our bodhicitta and feeds into our desire to benefit others on our path. So let's talk about each of these a little bit. In terms of karma and interdependence, there's a little verse that I'm sharing here from Nagarjuna. Nagarjuna wrote this book called Precious Garland of Advice. It's really quite a nice text. It's like 500 verses, I believe. It says, "From non-virtue comes all suffering, likewise all unfortunate rebirths. From virtue comes all fortunate rebirths and the happiness within all births." Again, this is just speaking to the reality of karma and virtue and non-virtue being what shapes our experiences. So when I talk about forgiveness being couched within this understanding of karma and interdependence, mainly talking about it from the perspective of everything that we experience, or even the things that we do, are informed by our karma, by what we have done in the past and what we are experiencing on the basis of our past actions. So when we have an interaction with another that goes south, either we say something and do something that offends them, or they do something that offends us, this is a karmic occurrence. This is ripening into that result of someone being harmed by the words or actions of another because of seeds that were planted at a previous time. And the karma is definitely a concept that's harder for our Western minds to get our heads around. And as I always say when I teach on karma, I cannot prove karma to any of you. Karma is not something that we can say, oh, this is why you're experiencing that result. A Buddha could do that because a Buddha is said to have an omniscient mind and could say, yes, the reason why you're experiencing this particular thing at this time from that person is because 5 lifetimes ago you did this to them and da 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 da, could explain the whole process of connection. I'm making it sound like it's somewhat linear, but it's actually much more dynamic than that. But this is what's kind of the foundation for why we experience anything. Or even it informs also why we behave in particular ways. For example, somebody might say something to you that you take as really offensive, and they didn't maybe mean it that way, because that does happen too, right? This is our own karmic conditioning. This is the own things that we have made ourselves somewhat sensitive to those sorts of comments. And so when someone says that, we might feel hurt. We might feel some, sadness, some, pain on the basis of those words. That may not have even been intended by that person. Karma conditions our minds and our experiences in ways that we can't even imagine. Karma is like the programming. Some people talk about how the Matrix, the film, is kind of like an example of Buddhism, and to some degree it works for some of these things. The programming in the Matrix is karma, in a sense. What we experience and how we relate to what we experience is informed by all of that. Karma is the principle of cause and effect in terms of our own actions and behavior playing out in giving us various experiences. So when we have things that are happening in our lives, going back to this topic of forgiveness, if you frame it that way, you start from a different point than where we normally start. When we normally are starting, if somebody is harming us, doing something that offends us, we put all the blame and onus on them, right? Why are they doing that to me? I don't deserve this. This isn't why, I don't want to hang around with this person anymore. They're awful. They're horrible, whatever. We put everything out there and think it has nothing to do with us. Well, karmically, it does have a lot to do with you. In fact, if you didn't create the seed, you couldn't experience that. So this is the underpinning that we need to have so that and it's not again to beat ourselves up then and to say, oh God, I'm a horrible person. Look at all the people in my life that are doing negative things to me. Look at all the horrible experiences I'm having. I must be really awful. That's not the point of understanding karma. It's not kind of an justification of things happening. It's simply an explanation. Why do you have vegetables in your backyard in the dirt and soil that you have as a garden? Because you planted the seeds. There's no other reason, right? They don't just grow from nowhere. You have to go through the effort in planting the seeds, and then you get all the zucchini and the, whatever you planted, tomatoes, everything, because you put the effort into doing it. Well, we're doing that all the time. We are planting seeds that ripen into our experiences. We have to begin to take ownership of that. The good things, wonderful. We created those good seeds. The negative things, the unpleasant things, well, guess what? We created those seeds as well. So if we frame everything we meet through that lens, there is less of a tendency to blame the other person because it's a joint thing going on. We are experiencing the fruition of karma through this person being a medium for that to get to us. Our karma comes home to roost because of that person playing a role. And of course, if we don't want to experience the same thing again, which we will if we do that identical thing, then we are much more careful. Then we do forgive. Then we do try to heal that relationship. If you want to continue to experience the same sorts of things happening in your life, well, then keep creating the same causes. It's that old phrase, right? That insanity means doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. Well, if we do that, we just keep planting the same seeds of anger and animosity towards everyone who's ever harmed us or said anything negative about us. Well, guess what? You're creating the same karma that caused that experience in the first place. So you're never going to break free of that. So this is kind of that concept of interdependence as well. We are caught up in this, kind of Indra's net, if you're familiar with that concept, of like interconnectivity. All of, what happens over here affects over here, and everything kind of spills over into our lives. There's no way to do anything in isolation. The things that we do have a ramification on others around us. And they can be positive, they can be negative. So forgiveness is one of those things that we do with that understanding that this is a way to tend to and once more sort of heal the relationships that we have with others. Can't help but keep emphasizing not only when they've harmed us, but when we've harmed them. Because when we have done things that have, brought misery and pain and difficulty for others, well, then we need to take ownership of that, especially if we did it with a mind that was not so healthy, a mind that actually meant to cause that person some pain or suffering or difficulty. Then, of course, we have something pretty major we have to work on. So we're going to talk about that tonight, as I said, when we get into forgiveness for ourselves. But also, of course, when others have harmed us, well, again, as long as we have that sort of barrier between ourselves and others because we can't forgive the other person who has harmed us, then we're going to continue to have negative states of mind ourselves. We're also going to be blocked from inviting that person into our heart again in some capacity. Not that you have to be physically with them. We're going to talk about that side of it as well. Sometimes there are people we can forgive from a distance and have nothing more to do with them. That's perfectly fine. There are certainly some people who have very difficult behaviors that would be challenging for us to be around, continue to be around. So again, this understanding of karma and interdependence is one of the building blocks for why we can practice forgiveness and the importance of practicing forgiveness. Otherwise, we just keep setting ourselves up to create the same type of karma, or we keep the other person in this pattern of creating the same sort of negative karma towards us because we're retaliating and they're, coming back at us and so on. So this is a pattern that we need to break. And if we can break it through the act of forgiveness, well, then how wonderful. The second thing, the faults of anger and hatred. There's a quote that has been attributed to the Buddha. There is actually a fake Buddhist quotes website where you can look these sorts of things up. And this one, I think, is a Buddhist, but it's not the Buddha himself. So I don't remember who it was, that some great Indian Buddhist teacher who said this. Holding on to anger is like grasping a hot coal with the intent of throwing it at someone else. You are the one who gets burned. This is understanding that anger can certainly hurt other people. I'm not denying that, but the initial pain and difficulty comes with the anger that is in our own hearts, that we hold on to ourselves. And this idea of us holding onto a hot coal, waiting to throw it at the person who offended us, this is what we're doing. We're just torturing ourselves by wanting that retaliation, wanting to get back, wanting revenge. Then a quote from Augustine of Hippo: resentment is like taking poison and hoping the other person dies. You know, that's another way to look at it, right? Because we tend to think that the more that I hold on to all of my resentment and anger and keep justifying why I need to have that towards that person that has offended me, the more they're going to suffer. But they're not the ones suffering. I mean, sometimes they don't even know that you're doing that, right? You're just building up your own little store of anger that's just going to torture yourself. So this is something to keep in mind. Anger has many, many faults. I don't have the time to go through the whole list of all the faults. And again, not just emotionally and spiritually, but physically. And there are physical ramifications to your blood pressure and your body and everything when you are holding on to anger. When you're I don't like to use the phrase angry person because then the anger and the person become kind of one. Anger is, in Buddhism, an afflictive emotion. It's something that has its causes and conditions. And as such, it doesn't have to be there. It's what we call adventitious. Anger can be diminished, and there are many teachings in Buddhism. We're not going to go into that so much as part of this course. But if you study, for example, Master Shantideva's sixth chapter on patience, which is the antidote to anger, then you'll get many clues about how to do it. There's also a wonderful book by Thupten Chodron called Working with Anger that has a lot of these tools. We need to become aware of how anger is, again, the biggest, most initial impact that it has in a negative way is on ourselves. It makes us miserable people. It makes us so sensitive to what's all going on that we can't even have a moment's peace. But it also, of course, will harm others because inevitably we will lash out. I mean, I just want to throw in a little editorial comment. I've gotten away from watching a lot of kind of movie entertainment. I don't know if it's quite as much in some of these TV shows that are out now, whatever. There's a tendency in a lot of movies these days to have revenge as like the big thing that the film's about. Something happens at the beginning of the film, and the rest of the film is about the person or people seeking revenge. And then like the audience clapping at the end when they finally take revenge upon the people who have harmed them. I mean, we have a lot of cultural influences as to why we do this. We justify our anger towards others who have harmed us on the basis of those sorts of influences that come in and say, yes, it's good to be angry at that person. And we even have friends that might say that to us, right? Keep aware of
Yeah.
all those different things that feed into the proliferation of your own anger. Forgiveness is a way of releasing that. And it's not like a one-shot deal. Okay, I forgive you and my anger's gone. Well, where'd it go? We have to work on it. We have to be able to do some individual work on the anger itself by framing it in particular ways. That's what all these antidotes to anger that are taught are all about. So you kind of see it in a different light. And then you can also, of course, continue the forgiveness. And we'll work with this forgiveness meditation that is a powerful tool to help us to let go of some of that anger and resentment. So, again, it does take a more concerted effort. Of course, one of the ways to understand and generate a more positive emotion in the face of anger and hatred is compassion. But I've got maybe one more thing to share here, maybe one or two things. One thing, actually, yeah, from that same chapter that I mentioned earlier, Master Shantideva's text, The Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life, verse 6 again is the chapter on patience. Hence the enemy anger creates suffering such as these, but whoever assiduously overcomes it finds happiness now and hereafter. So again, anger and hatred, if we become more familiar with, of course, first the faults of it, the disadvantages of having that state of mind, and then put some energy into overcoming it through practicing these antidotes, well, then we will have, again, greater peace of mind. So what I was alluding to just a second ago, though, is that if we reframe everything in terms of the positive emotion of compassion, then we have a much greater kind of peace of mind that can be generated because we're not just saying, I'm not going to have anger, we're also going to generate some positive thoughts towards the person who has harmed us, or even again towards ourselves. To frame this, I want to start with a verse from the same text by Master Shantideva, but this goes back to the very first chapter. The first chapter is all about bodhicitta and developing bodhicitta and the need for it. Again, that mind that we meditated on for the motivation tonight that wishes to benefit all beings by becoming a Buddha. In that chapter, Master Shantideva says, although wishing to be rid of misery, they run towards misery itself. Although wishing to have happiness, Like an enemy, they ignorantly destroy it. What Master Shantideva is getting at with these two thoughts that are in this verse is that sentient beings are ignorant of what they are doing. And as such, I mean, I'm not using ignorant here as a derogatory word. It's just a reality. The Buddha says that all beings are plagued by ignorance. That's the root of samsara. That's the root of all of our problems. And that ignorance in particular, one way it manifests is that beings don't have any clue about how to get what they actually desire. All beings are the same in wanting to be happy, not wanting to suffer, but they're clueless when it comes to how to get the causes for that. They go chasing after the things that only lead them to more suffering, and they avoid the things that would bring them happiness and do away with them and not really create the causes for that. Of course, that's one of the first levels of ignorance that we try to overcome on the path, is to become aware of the mechanism by which we can have an effect on our experiences. If you want happiness, you have to engage in virtue. If you want to continue to suffer, well, then engage in non-virtue. But if you avoid non-virtue and engage in virtue, you are creating the causes for exactly what you want to experience. In a temporal way, but even in an ultimate way, you can create the causes for your own liberation from samsara and your own Buddhahood if you engage in virtue wholeheartedly, and especially the virtue that is embodied in the wisdom that will cut through the ignorance that is the deeper error that we have. The fact that we aren't seeing things correctly and that we aren't understanding the nature of ourselves and the nature of all phenomena. I'm not going to touch on that quite so much in this course, but that is, of course, the main teaching that the Buddha is driving us to get to a place where we recognize that whether we have an experience of happiness or suffering is in our own hands. Initially, by learning about how to avoid non-virtue and engage in virtue, in other words, practice the law of karma. And then finally, by doing away with what is keeping us in samsara, this round of cyclic existence. So this is the premise for why we need compassion, is because every being, ourselves included, are doing the same thing, are engaging in, it looks like the screen froze. Did it freeze? Yeah, I think it did. Okay. Sorry, folks, we lost the connection there again. Hopefully,
It's still recording.
is it recording still? Because it looked like you didn't lose the connection, did you, Joe?
Yeah.
Yeah.
He did as well. Okay. Yeah, it's recording and according to the thing in my, or it looks like things are frozen again. There's Roger's moving. Sarah's moving. I'm getting them, yeah. My internet connection is unstable. Okay, well, here and there. So again, what I was getting into was this idea that if we have the understanding that the fundamental situation that beings are in is such that they are prone to experiencing suffering and not finding happiness because of the conditions that have led them to be in samsara, that are a part of their programming, if you will. Well, then our hearts open up with greater compassion for them because we understand that they're suffering needlessly, in a sense. They're suffering only because of that ignorance, because they don't know how to create the causes for even temporal happiness and well-being, much less more ultimate happiness and well-being. So that's the beginning point to kind of frame that. Let me see if I can share a little bit more of this. Um, Hopefully that will come up. Did you get the screen with the Shantideva on it? No, maybe?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
So then I have this verse that is in chapter 6 again of Master Shantideva, where he says, if, when under the influence of disturbing conceptions, people will even kill their treasured selves, right? This unfortunately happens, that people, through their own deluded minds, will commit suicide, will take their own lives. how can they be expected not to cause harm to the bodies of other living beings? If this is a situation that beings are in, that they are occasionally, not all the time, under the control of such disturbing emotions and conceptions that they will cause themselves harm and cause others harm, this is just what we can expect of some. Okay, maybe. Sorry, folks. Okay, so I was sharing the verse from Master Shanti Deva's, the second verse, and then I went into some again. I don't think that everyone got that. And the recording is going still? Yes. Hopefully. Okay, so in our own mind, usually frustrations, anger, and hatred come. Here, it's very useful to make a distinction, check in again with everybody once we're dealing with some black boxes. I'm not sure what that means. Maybe. Yeah, but it's not coming through with me speaking, or I don't know.
Okay,
Oh,
the images are back now,
they are. Okay.
including you.
There I am.
Everybody's moving.
Sorry, folks. We're got an unstable internet connection here tonight. So, yeah, I'm getting the message. Am I unfrozen now?
Yeah.
Okay. Let's hope it continues for a while. So let me just talk about this idea that His Holiness has put forward that I think is an important part of our dimension of examining forgiveness, which is this differentiation between the person and their actions, the actor and the actions they engage in. And again, we're not saying that we're letting everyone off the hook for all the actions that they do, because people do need to take responsibility for the actions that they engage in. And that's part of our Buddhist learning, right? Is to recognize we have to be responsible. We have to take charge of our actions and be better about what we do in the world so that we don't continue to step in it every time and get more and more negative karma. But the other thing is that, these are people still on? Is it? Okay, all right. It looks like screen.
Me too, yeah.
Hey, looks like folks are all back on. So what I was getting into was again this idea that when we as Buddhists is to recognize that we have to stop the same thing over and over again and so on. When we're observing other beings, though, they're under the control of their karma and their delusions, and they don't have misbehavior. So we have to be able to separate the actions that beings engage in from we okay.
Mm.
All right. Give it another try. So, yeah, John never came back, so I'm not sure what's going on with all of this. But so we have again the see that yes, I'm really sorry, folks. This must be getting a little annoying for everyone. We get a chance to practice patience, I guess. So I think folks are getting the gist of what I'm saying, that in the Buddhist perspective, we have compassion for the beings, and yet we can condemn their actions or even say their actions need to be opposed in some way. But we understand why they're engaging in those actions because they're under the control of their karma and delusions. They don't know what they're doing. That's right, what Christ said on the cross, right? One of his last words. Forgive them, Father, for they know not what they do. Well, I mean, in some level, this is the rationale for forgiveness in Buddhism and for compassion for them. Oppose their action, their activities, we always can keep compassion to not develop hatred towards the person, and on that basis to develop forgiveness. So again, this is the rationale: is that we oppose their actions, and yet we
maintain a compassionate stance towards the people,
towards the
towards the
individuals that are
individuals that are
engaging in
engaging
those
in those
actions.
actions.
And then
And
from
then
Thich
from
Nhat
Thich Nhat
Hanh,
Hanh,
who passed away a
passed away
number
a
of
number
years
of
ago
years ago
now,
now.
forgiveness will
Forgiveness
not
will
be
not be
possible
possible
until
until
compassion is
compassion
born
is
in your
born in your
heart.
heart.
Even if you
Even if
want
you
to
want to
forgive, you
forgive, you
cannot
cannot
forgive.
forgive.
So
So
understand that
understand that
compassion is
compassion is
definitely a
definitely a
teaching
teaching
within this
within this
framework that I
framework
just
that I just
discussed,
discussed,
having
having
compassion for the
compassion for the
person and
person
yet
and
being
yet being
opposed to their
opposed to their
actions.
actions.
That will
That will
inform
inform
our,
our,
practice of
practice of
compassion in
compassion in
Buddhism.
Buddhism.
I want to
I want to
briefly talk
briefly talk
about
about
those quotes
those
from His
quotes from His
Holiness. I
Holiness.
think
I
they're
think they're
coming
coming
from
from
this book, The Wisdom of Forgiveness. Some of you may have read this. This is like a dialogue between Victor Chan and His Holiness the Dalai Lama. And in brief, I'm just going to talk about the one story where he goes into forgiveness, or at least this stance that we were just talking about. He said he heard about a story where a young Tibetan boy was being tortured by Chinese guards because of what that boy's father had done. His father was part of the opposition to the Chinese and so on. And so they had arrested the boy and were beating him on the basis of the actions of the father. And they asked His Holiness, Victor Chan asked His Holiness, well, what are your thoughts around all of this? And His Holiness says, when I first heard about this, yes, I was angry. There was anger there. I was angry that the Chinese guards were doing this to this young Tibetan boy. He said, but the more I thought about it, the more I understood that the reason why these Chinese guards were doing the behavior they were doing was rooted in a whole chain of causes and conditions that led them to be that way. I mean, if you look at what the Chinese government was doing, the propaganda that they used to say that, this is in the best interest of the people of China for them to suppress these kinds of dissidents and what have you, and the Tibetan boy was seen as that through that lens, it's understandable why they are engaging in that action. It's not justifiable. We're not again getting into justifying actions. We're just having a different perspective and understanding. Again, when we have this understanding of karma, interdependence, need to have passion for people on the basis of seeing if they set it up like no, this person is absolutely wrong. I need to do everything I can to get back at them and retaliate for their actions. Wrong, and I need to do everything I can to retaliate for their actions. Back to the slides and see what happens. Maybe this will get in the recording. I'm not sure.
People are moving along.
Okay. So that is in general. Let me actually stop it here and just see if there are questions. Maybe if I stop doing the slideshare, that might have some impact. I don't know. What are questions or comments people have at this point on the basis of what I've already shared about forgiveness and how we can ground it in some Buddhist teachings? Anyone?
Well, it makes a lot of sense. I've been getting into this forgiveness thing. And
Good.
one of the things about it is it makes me miserable not being able to forgive someone. So, it's hurting me to not forgive.
Mm-hmm.
Then on the other side, people are angry, or some people are angry at me, and I don't know why.
Mm-hmm.
And I still forgive them and everything, but it's maybe these people don't understand why you are angry with them. That type of thing. The communication is usually not very good.
This is true. I think poor communication is one of the biggest problems we have that creates these situations where forgiveness is needed. But because we are talking to the other person, they aren't talking to us. And then, of course, people are making assumptions on the basis of their own lens, their own perspective of how they're looking at the situation. And so there's a lot of things that feed into these complicated situations that we have. And that's why, again, when we have a bigger perspective, when we're able to look at it from the point of view, it's not just what I'm seeing and experiencing and how I'm labeling it and working with it. It's also whoever else is involved, what they are doing and saying and thinking and whatever. And so we have to be open to seeing that and hearing that. I mean, I think a lot of this is a class I did some time ago here on bridging our differences. One of the biggest problems with divisiveness in our country is that people aren't talking to each other. People aren't sitting down and saying, okay, what do you think about what's going on? And particular points of view and actually hearing other people express their needs, their desires. What it is what it means for them to hold the particular points of view that they do. Unless we do that, we aren't going to kind of get past this place of friction and problems. So that's again something that is a part of this as well. So to examine that, we have to be aware. We have to be willing to hear. So this
So
makes
this makes
sense. I'm glad
sense.
you
I'm
said
glad you
that,
said that,
Anne-Marie.
Anne-Marie.
It's grounding that
That
feeds into
feeds
our
into our
Buddhist
Buddhist
practice. It
practice.
helps
It
us to
helps us to
understand,
understand,
karma and
karma and
interdependence. It
interdependence.
helps
It
us
helps
to
us to
be
be
aware of
aware of
how
how
anger is one
anger
of the
is one of the
worst
worst
faults we
faults
can
that we
have,
can
and we need
have,
to
and
do
we need to do
everything we
everything
can
we
to
can
avoid
to
it.
avoid it.
And it helps
And it
us to
helps us
even
to
deepen
even
our
deepen our
compassion for
compassion
other
for
beings because we understand the
understand the
situation that
situation
they
that
are
they
in,
are
that
in,
we
that we
really are
really
all
are
in,
all in.
because none
Because
of us
none
is
of us is
perfect.
perfect.
We
We got to
start now by
start now by
looking at
looking at
forgiveness for
forgiveness for
ourselves. And
ourselves. And
forgiveness for
forgiveness for
ourselves is
ourselves is
important
important
because
because
we
we
aren't
aren't
able to
able to
always
always
control,
control,
especially our
especially our
speech and
speech and
our
our
physical
physical
behavior.
behavior.
Speech is the
Speech is
big
the
one,
big
right?
one,
We get
right? We
into
get
more
into more
trouble with our
trouble with our
speech, I
speech,
think,
I
than
think, than
any other behavior we do. Was that one
was that one
fortune that I
fortune
had
that
at
I
a
had at a
Chinese
Chinese
restaurant that
restaurant
said,
that said,
uh, humans are
humans are
ensnared by
ensnared
their
by their
words as
words as
birds are
birds
by
are
their
by their
feet.
feet.
Birds that get
Birds that
caught
get caught
in
in
nets and
nets and
whatever due to
whatever
their
due to their
feet. Well,
feet.
we
Well,
get
we
caught
get
in all
caught in
the
all the
nets with
nets
other
with other
people due to
people due to
our
our
speech, due to the
speech, due to
ways
the
that we
ways that
can't
we
really
can't really
control our
control our
speech.
speech.
So let's
So
take a
let's
look
take a
at
look at
a bit
a
of
bit
this
of
on
this on
forgiving
forgiving
ourselves so we
ourselves
can
so
at
we can
least
at
start
least
to
start
work
to
with
work with
this.
this.
This is
This
again
is
the
again
first
the
of the
first
three
of the three
levels that I
levels
want
that
to
I
work
want to
with
work
through
with
these
through
three
these three
sessions.
sessions.
What is
What is
self-forgiveness? And you
self-forgiveness?
do
And
have
you
a
do have a
handout for
handout
this, by
for
the
this,
way,
by the
which
way, which
was sent
was
out by
sent out by
Sarah. Thank
Sarah.
you.
Thank you.
I
I
passed it on
passed
to
it on to
John, and he
John,
got
and
it
he
to
got it to
Sarah, so it
Sarah,
went
so
out
it
with
went
the
out with the
email
email
for this
for this
week.
week.
And
And
Rick
Rick
Hansen, who
Hansen,
many
who
of you
many of you
have heard
have
of, he
heard of,
wrote a
he
book
wrote a
called
book
The
called The
Buddha's
Buddha's
Brain, and
Brain,
has
and
written a
has written
number
a
of
number
books.
of
He
books.
has
He has
his
his
feet both
feet
in
both
the
in the
Western
Western
psychology,
psychology
Buddhist
and Buddhist
psychology. He
psychology. He
says,
says,
seeing
seeing
faults
faults
clearly,
clearly,
taking
taking
responsibility for
responsibility
them
for
with
them with
remorse and
remorse and
making
making
amends,
amends,
and then
and then
coming to
coming
peace
to
about
peace
them.
about
This
them.
is
This
what
is
I
what I
mean by
mean by
forgiving
forgiving
yourself.
yourself.
Taking responsibility for the fact that, again, we do step in it, we do make mistakes. We have to,
We have to
make
make
amends as
amends
best
as
as we
best as we
can,
can,
given
given
that
that
we
we
are
are
imperfect
imperfect
beings, and come to
and come to
peace
peace
about them.
about them.
And
And
sometimes that's the
sometimes that's
hard
the
part of
hard
it,
part of it,
because we
because we
still
still
tend to
tend to ruminate
and put
and put
ourselves
ourselves
down on the
down on
basis
the
of the
basis of
things
the
that we
things
have
that we have
done
done
that
that
we
we
feel
feel
guilty
guilty
about.
about.
You'll
You'll
notice
notice that
that guilt is
guilt
the
is
word
the
I've
word I've
touched on, but
touched
it's
on, but
not
it's
in
not in
any of these
any of these
descriptions.
descriptions.
We
We
shouldn't
shouldn't
be
be
incorporating
incorporating
guilt
guilt
into it
into
if
it
we can
if we can
avoid it.
avoid it.
But when
But
we
when
have
we
guilt,
have
we have
guilt,
to
we
learn
have
to
to learn to
dismantle it.
dismantle it.
Guilt is
Guilt is
taking having some
having some
remorse. It
remorse. It
starts with
starts with
that,
that,
feeling bad
feeling
about
bad
what
about
you've
what you've
done.
done.
But it goes on to say, and I'm a horrible person because I did that. It's a negative feeling towards ourselves. It's not worth anything. And in fact, it causes us more pain and misery on top of what we're already experiencing. So try to avoid that as best as you can and work with self-forgiveness free of guilt. But those are important elements of it. So why do you need to forgive yourself? Why are we even starting with this as the first of these three levels? Jack Kornfield says, finding a way to
Way
extend
to extend
forgiveness to
forgiveness to
ourselves is
ourselves
one of
is
our
one of our
most
most
essential
essential
tasks.
tasks.
Just as
Just as
others have
others
been
have been
caught in
caught in
suffering,
suffering,
so
so
have
have
we.
we.
I mean, if we
If we
look at the Buddhist path, and most
most
of
of
you
you
are
are
familiar
familiar
with the
with the
long
long
rim, the
rim,
stages of the
stages of the
path that
path
we
that we
all use
all
as a
use as a
basis
basis
for
for
our
our
engaging in
engaging
these
in these
teachings,
teachings,
we
we
see
see
that
that
it
it
always
always
starts with
starts with
ourselves.
ourselves.
The first
The
two
first two
levels of the
levels of the
stages of the
stages of
path
the
are
path
looking
are
at our
looking
own
at our own
situation,
situation,
clearly
clearly
examining
examining
faults that
faults
we
that we
have and
have
wanting
and
to be
wanting to
free
be
of
free of
those and
those
wanting
and
to
wanting to
find
find
peace for
peace for
ourselves.
ourselves.
If we
If we
start
start
there,
there,
then we
then we
can
can
more
more
robustly
robustly
identify with
identify with
others.
others.
We can
We
make
can
sure
make
that
sure
we
that we
don't
don't
end up in
end up
sort
in
of some sort
some
of
sort of
silo, just
silo,
looking
just
at our
looking
own
at our own
situation.
situation.
We
We
can
can
then
then
kind of
kind of
see
see
others through the
others through the
lens of
lens
our
of
own
our own
experience.
experience.
The fact
The
that
fact that
when we
when we
examine our
examine our
behavior in our
behavior in
own
our own
minds, we
minds, we
see
see
that we're
that
doing
we're
the
doing
same
the
things
same
that
things
others
that
are
others
doing.
are doing.
And then we
And then
can
we
look at
can look at
others with,
others
again,
with,
greater
again, greater
compassion and
compassion
greater
and greater
connection.
connection.
But we have
We
to
have
start
to
with
start with
ourselves, and we
ourselves, and we
start
start
self-compassion. compassion. With self-compassion, when we're generating compassion. We start with self-love when we're generating love. We start with developing our own equanimity when we're wanting other beings to also have that equanimous mind. All of it starts with ourselves for good reason. Because if we don't see our own situation that clearly, how can we possibly see the situation of others? Master Shantideva, I didn't put this one on the screen, but he says, how can beings who have not yet had that wish for themselves possibly wish it for another? If we haven't had our own wish to find the peace of forgiveness and to work with it, then how can we help others to engage in acts of forgiveness or kindness or whatever it is that we're working on? So this is always a part of it, a necessary part of it. And so I agree with Jack Kornfield that there's good reason to start with ourselves. He goes on to say, if we look honestly at our life, We can see the sorrows and pain that have led to our own wrongdoing. In this, we can finally extend forgiveness to ourselves. We can hold the pain we have caused in compassion. Without such mercy, we will live our own life in exile. So this is part of it too, is as I was saying just a short while ago, self-compassion is an important component of it. If we actually see ourselves as beings who have been conditioned, again, by various factors that we have been participating in to engage in particular ways, well, then we understand that we're suffering beings under the control of these factors, and we can have compassion for ourselves, seeing our own situation clearly. And then once more, we can have greater compassion for others because of that. Every one of us is a product of all the myriad things that have come together that create us for who we are. A lot of people, again, are carrying a lot of, they use that phrase, the walking wounded. We're all walking wounded at some level. The things that have happened to us, trauma we've experienced, various experiences that have formed us and created us to be how we are in the world. We have to be able to look at ourselves with that compassion that understands that we're a product of. And again, we're not saying when that's fine, just leave it the way it is. In Buddhism, we're always trying to improve ourselves. And that's what forgiveness is all about. I want to be able to forgive myself. Not to just kind of brush it off and say, oh, no big deal. I'll just keep doing the same thing over and over again and forgiving myself over and over again. That's not really very productive. That's not really very productive. With the understanding that we want to do better. That we want to be the person who is not offending people in the first place. Because then we don't have to worry about forgiving, and we don't create the karma that causes them pain and us to experience suffering in the future, and so on. So everything is caught up around this idea of seeing our own situation clearly, so we can avoid those behaviors. So how do we forgive ourselves? Whoops, two slides. These are again all of the instructions that I have. I can share that sheet with you on screen in a moment. But it says reflect first on how you have not forgiven yourself fully for any of the three types of actions you have done that have harmed yourself, and which have often also been harmful to others. But you're not focusing on others at this point. You're focusing on yourself. Things that you've done physically, your bodily actions, taking the lives of small beings, or what have you, or stealing from others, what have you. Speech, where we have engaged in lying, or dividing others through our speech, or speaking harshly, and so on. Thoughts, the thoughts of attachment and anger and so on that the Buddha teaches as our root afflictions and all the derivative afflictions from those. All of those things we've harmed ourselves by having those thoughts. So we bring those to mind. It gets to be a little bit similar to a purification practice, and I will talk about purification practice. Probably not tonight, but I'll touch on that next week, because that is also a part of self-forgiveness. Because in Buddhism, it's not just this process of self-forgiveness. We need to go through an action that is dedicated to purifying our negative karma. Begin self-forgiveness with less significant things and work up to those that are heavier. This is the general advice for all of these. Don't start with, I'm betting most of you have not killed a human being in this life, but perhaps some women have had an abortion, or were part of the decision for making an abortion, or having an abortion. Some of the men may have had that role that they played. If that is something that you have done, don't start there necessarily. That's a pretty heavy thing to work with. Many people work with that for almost their entire life. When I was working in the prison, there was one gentleman I worked with who had taken the life of another man, and I encouraged him to work with that as best as he could, but to recognize that it's best to start perhaps with things that are not that heavy. Those things do need to be purified, obviously. But forgiveness can start with just looking at, again, what are the things that I've engaged in on a day-to-day basis that have been harmful to me by virtue of those behaviors that have generally, again, harmed others. As you do this practice, appreciate your good qualities, especially your willingness to work with your own faults in this way. So when it says do this practice, what I want to go through, and I'm just kind of recognizing that the time is getting a bit precious with all of what we've done tonight. So let's go to you have kind of two things in our handouts that I've provided that have been sent out to you. One is the
One is the
forgiveness
forgiveness
meditation that
meditation
Jack
that Jack
Kornfield put
Kornfield put
together
together
that
that
I
I
retrieved from
retrieved
his
from his
website and
website
give
and
him
give
full
him full
credit for all
credit
of
for
this.
all
I
of
did
this. I did
modify a few words
here
here.
and there.
But in the
But
center of your screen there, more or less, is the forgiveness for yourself. That's the first step. And you're welcome again to read through this whole meditation. But
We're not seeing that.
oh, you're not seeing that there.
There.
Okay, then I need to do my thing. Sorry. It's probably got screwed up when I was bopping in and out of the Zoom room. Yeah, it's not duplicating. Okay, there we go. Sorry, folks, we weren't having it on screen here. It should be on screen for everyone now. Okay.
Okay.
So
So
this is what
this is
Jack
what Jack
Kornfield says
Kornfield
is
says
is the meditation that we want to engage in. We
We
say
say
there are many ways that I
that
have
I
hurt
have
and
hurt and
harmed
harmed
myself.
myself.
I have
I have
betrayed or abandoned
myself
many times through thought,
word, or
or deed,
deed,
knowingly or
knowingly or
unknowingly.
unknowingly.
Feel your own precious body and life. Let yourself see the ways you have hurt or harmed yourself. Picture them, remember them. Feel the sorrow you have carried from this, and sense that you can release these burdens. Extend forgiveness for each of them, one by one. Repeat to yourself, for the ways I have hurt myself through action or inaction, out of fear, pain, and confusion, I now extend a full and heartfelt forgiveness. I forgive myself. I forgive myself. These are the words in italics there that he's suggesting. That's not the only words that you could use. You can use whatever words speak to you. But I like how he informs this, and I had no problem with his language or what he's putting together here. What I've done is I've put together kind of some additional notes that are in the slides as well on things that you can do. So essentially, the slides that I was just working with is this section here. How do I forgive myself? And I just mentioned that beginning with less significant things, and then as you do this, appreciate your good quality done in this life to learn and grow from those experiences. And if you haven't, then make a commitment to learning to, from those negative experiences, those things you've done that are harmful to others, so that you can grow and develop from them. The next bullet point, observe whatever feeling of forgiveness that arises in your heart as you recite these words towards yourself, as well as thoughts in your mind and sensations in your body. Again, try to see, detect what is happening as you're forgiving. Are you feeling some noticeable difference? And then the next bullet point, engage in the practice as best as you can, even if it doesn't feel genuine at first, it will become more authentic over time. This is back to that old thing we practice frequently in Buddhism, which is fake it till you make it. So, don't feel like you have to make this, it's really feeling like my forgiveness is complete and full. From the beginning, it might feel a little bit awkward and maybe not like you can really muster up those feelings. But over time, it will improve. And then conclude the meditation by reflecting on your own values and aspirations that you want to honor and uphold in the future, and establish a strong intention to continue in that direction. This is kind of like, again, I mentioned this parallels to the purification practice. When you get to the end of the purification practice, you review those negative things that you purified and make a commitment to not doing them again as best as you can. The same is here in the forgiveness practice. Think you're making a commitment at the end to say, I'm going to do better in the future. I'm going to try to work with my own behavior in terms of the things I say and do with others and so on, and even the thoughts that I have, so I can avoid stepping in and again. That's a great way to again work with this. So we will look a little bit more at purification next week. Let me just jump forward to the slide. Oh, there is a little bit on why is it so hard to forgive ourselves. Maybe I'll touch on that next week. I think maybe I'll just stop here and see what questions we have. What I would like you to do, this is an invitation. It's not a requirement by any means, is work with this first step, that little bit about generating forgiveness for yourself. Try to inform it with some of what's there in the additional notes, to think about those actions that you've done, and maybe just pick one of them initially to work with. You don't have to get the whole laundry list of everything you've ever done in your life where you've ever stepped on anybody's toes, and then try to forgive yourself for all of those things. Work with, again, something that's maybe not so heavy, but something that you would really like to use as a starting point, and begin to grant forgiveness to yourself for that action, for that behavior. And so again, do it through these sorts of words, through the meditation, And the additional thoughts that I've added in terms of really trying to feel it as best as you can, feel that you are letting go of some of that additional layer of stuff that you're throwing on yourself that is not so helpful. Again, to keep beating ourselves up over and over again for the negative things that we've done. I know this is one of the hardest things to release, and that's why self-forgiveness is also important, because we carry around that stuff and it influences how we are in the world. But we have so much, so many thoughts and ideas of low self-esteem and self-denigration in our culture. It's epidemic, right? We've talked about that before on a number of occasions. That's something that we need to correct. Stop all that kind of negative language and see yourself through the lens of greater compassion for yourself as well as forgiving yourself. So, any comments or questions on what I've talked about tonight? And again, apologize once more. It's not my fault, but I just feel bad that people were having to deal with some of that. Yeah. Anyone here?
I think the element of rejoicing, when you realize that you haven't repeated something that you do all the time, is really important.
Yeah.
It's a a pat on the back.
Uh-huh.
And I think that it's really helpful.
Sure. Yeah, Eloise's point of, if we really rejoice and feel good that we aren't repeat offenders, we've been able to let some actions go, and we've replaced them with healthier ways of being in the world. It's really, really important to do that. Rejoicing. This is another thing that I often emphasize. We'll again look at the four opponent powers for purification briefly in next week's class, because that should be done maybe in conjunction with a self-forgiveness meditation. But when we do those, we should have a rejoicing component as well. When we're looking at cleaning up our garbage, cleaning up the negative things that we've done, we should also be really rejoicing and feeling good about all the positive things that we've done. Because we, as creatures of human beings that have these sort of patterns, particularly in the West, will tend to focus in on the negative stuff and really identify with that and see ourselves through that lens, and not see all the things that we've done where we've improved and we've changed our minds and we're better beings because of it. So congratulate yourself. Be joyful for yourself. So it's a very good.
Very good point.
There's something in the chat that I didn't have.
Oh, yeah. Sorry. For the dedication list,
you can get the names up to that. I'll leave it up on the screen here.
Ellen K. or Diane. Okay. Amber, I already put it on there.
And Phil M.
And died Phil M.
Okay. Any other comments or questions from tonight? Yes, Anne Marie.
I think it's important to recognize that there's things that happen that people do, that I do, you do, and we don't know that we're doing something that's offensive, or just because we're clumsy with our words or things like that. And that's another thing to ask forgiveness. So at Thanksgiving, I took the idea that maybe things weren't great with people in my family and stuff like that. And so after I said great Thanksgiving. I said, and I love you, and I'm sorry for anything that may have gone wrong. And because I think, well, certainly for me, I can't talk for other people, but there's things that we do that are just not, we're just not cognizant of.
No, it's a very good
point that often we are
doing things without a real awareness of how we are
offending others.
That understanding is good to think about from the perspective of flipping it over and saying, and others are doing things they are often unaware of as offensive towards you. And so being able to kind of be in that space of recognizing that we're all dealing with that lack of awareness, lack of knowledge, lack of ability, and also the factors I talked about, being under the control of our own crazy deluded minds and often doing things just because that's what we are habituated to do. So absolutely, these are helpful thoughts. Yeah, they do create more space because we don't concretize everything as what we heard and how we heard it is the absolute truth.
Exactly, Mark.
Yeah, yeah. Yes, Jenna.
Hasn't Venerable Robina said that as you're walking down the street, every person you see, you can think to yourself, I'm sorry, and I forgive you.
I think I do recall her saying.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah. That you could actually just make that your practice at every. You're in a sense seeking forgiveness.
Yeah, that you could
Even
maybe we'll
through
talk
this
about that a little bit
process
next week.
of
Even through this
forgiveness,
process of
change
forgiveness, does
things
that change
karmically?
things karmically?
And there's no set teaching on that, but I'll give you some of my thoughts perhaps on that. But I think when we have that feeling, like we must have offended every being in the world. Because there is that understanding that we have in Buddhism that every being has been our mother. Well, think about your own mother of this life. Have you ever offended her?
I
know that I offended her
on an
occasion
or two
or three or 5 or 10 or 20 here.
So we've all been in a role
we've
where
all
we've
been in a
done
role
something
where
that
we've done something that has been harmful to
having
another
that
being,
feeling
and
of
having that feeling of
seeking
wishing
forgiveness.
forgiveness, seeking forgiveness. This is something we're going to examine in more detail next week as well. That's
Second step. The first step is forgiving ourselves.
ourselves.
The second
The
step
second
is
step,
seeking
seeking
forgiveness
forgiveness
of
of
others,
others, putting that
out there, even in just meditation, that or in our wandering around from person to person as we go through, walking on the street or whatever the case might be. Is it, what do we do to frame that, to form that,
to
kind of
seek forgiveness of others?
And then when we're doing
that in a much more concrete way,
how do we inform it with apologizing? When I initially did this course on forgiveness, I didn't include much on apologizing. And then as I studied
more,
I realized that
apologizing is actually something we're not taught to do very well.
Most of us don't
apologize
as well as we
could.
So we'll
talk about that more next week as well.
All right.
All right.
Let's
go ahead and conclude tonight.
It's been a challenging night. Let's do the recitation of the prayer list first. Jan is going to do that, and then we'll do some prayers. So again, some of you have added names to the prayer list in the Zoom room. If you have other names to add, please feel free to put them in the chat box, and we'll make sure they get included.
We dedicate merit created by listening to this teaching to all everywhere on every prayer list. We dedicate for the health and long lives of all our precious teachers. We dedicate for all those who are experiencing obstacles, specifically Wyatt, Amber the dog, Adrian, and Jana. We dedicate for all those experiencing illness, specifically Jane, Lou DeSantis, Jill, Bill, Tilly the dog, Jana and Carola. Bon the dog. Bon, and Tata, the female dog. They both were operated on today. What was the second one? Well, it's Mulata, but it's Tata. We call her Tata. Tata.
Could you put Bodhi on the obstacle list?
Bodhi.
Bodhi the dog.
Okay. We dedicate for all those who have died recently or who are dying, specifically Bob, Patty, Ed Satterfield, the mice, Helen K, and Phil M.
And if there are any other beings that we're holding in our hearts at this time, we dedicate for their welfare as well, to be free from suffering, and to find peace and happiness
that they seek.
Let's go ahead and do our concluding prayers. So I'll get those up on the screen, and Jana will happily lead us in those. Lama Sangye Dubgyurme Dowa Chikyam Malupa Dehi Sala Goparsho Sam Chagrin Porche Ma Ke Panam Ke Gyurche Ke Wanyam Pame Payam
Gong re gong du pel war shu.
Long life prayer for His Holiness the Dalai Lama, the wish-granting, wish-fulfilling jewel,
source of every single benefit and happiness in this world. To the incomparably kind Tenzin Gyatso I beseech, may all your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled.
for the swift return of Lama Zopa Rinpoche,
Fearless teacher and assembly of the children of the victorious ones, Shogakas and Pratyeka Buddhas, victorious Losang father and sons, along with the lineage masters, all the objects of refuge of infinite lands, please bestow the virtue and goodness of accomplishing this prayer here and now. Holding and spreading the Muni's precious and complete teachings through explanation and practice, you wore the armor of patience that is never discouraged. Incomparable venerable Guru, to you I make request. While striving single-pointedly for the sake of the victorious one's teachings, the sole gateway through which all benefit and happiness emerge. You suddenly departed to peace, to great loss. Nevertheless, through the undeceiving truth of the blessings of the ocean of the three jewels, with the great waves of bodhicitta of the children of the victorious ones, with the smile of a reincarnation, supreme in glory, we're fortunate to listen to both. Okay, thank you all for joining and hanging in there tonight. And we will resume these teachings next Thursday. So again, if you can work with the self-forgiveness meditation, that would be wonderful. All right, be well. See you then.
Thank you, Don. Thank you, Don.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Okay,
Okay.
bye-bye.
Thank you, Don. Thank you, John, and everyone.